Hi, and welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast for this Tuesday episode, Authors Tuesday. Today, I'm delighted to be having another guest on the podcast. His name is David Butler. So you're very welcome along today, David. Thanks a lot for
Thank you very
joining me.
much, Mark. That's great.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. So, would you like to start off the podcast telling the listeners a bit about yourself and your writing, if you don't mind? It'd be great.
Sure, yeah. Well, basically, I've been writing quite a long time.
Yeah.
I started getting properly published in about 20 years ago, I suppose. I
Very
had a couple
good.
of stories published and winning competitions, a few poems and Poetry Ireland. I lectured then, I was lecturing literature down in Carlow, and I was there up till 2010. And the problem was that while I was lecturing, which I loved, I wasn't writing. So I made a call on what to do in 2010 and decided I was going to give it a year, see what happened, see if it got published. And I was very lucky because the following year, 2011, I had my first poetry book published.
Great.
The year after that, a novel. The year after that, a book of short stories. The year after that,
Brilliant.
another novel. So I thought, okay, I've made the right call here. I mean, obviously, you have to support yourself. So I do a lot of creative writing teaching with the Writer Centre, with libraries, things like that. A bit of mentoring, a bit of tutoring. But basically, since then, I've 10 years as a full-time writer. And then just to bring everyone up to date, in the last month, I've been lucky enough to have a couple of books come out. There's the poetry collection. I don't know if people can see that.
Yeah, I can see that. Fair play to you. Looks great. Yeah, looks great. I saw that on the website. It's really good.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Liffey. Yeah, great stuff. It looks great. Yeah.
It just came out last month with Dira Press. It's my second book with them. They published that one a few years ago, All the Barbaric Glass. And then Ireland House, I've just brought out my second short story collection.
Brilliant.
Literally available from today on Book Depository. So there we go. And that's called Fugitive. So that's where we are at the moment, Mark, in terms of the writing.
Yeah. And where did the journey begin? Have you always been a writer yourself? Have you always dabbled in the writing?
The same as an awful lot of people. I mean, I was trying to write when I was in school. I was, in particular, as a teenager, I was spouting very bad poetry, the same way you spout acne, you know. And I was then trying to write novels. I mean, I have 2 or 3 failed novels on the hard drive. But as I said, I started taking myself more seriously as a writer. I was lucky, I got a chance to go back to college in that I was working in the UK. And even though I'm Irish and I had an Irish degree, they paid for me to go back to college, you know, which is lovely. So I actually did an arts degree then in Latin American literature. Spent a year in Venezuela, studied all, you know, Garcia Marquez, Juan Rulfo, all the great Latin American writers. And it was the first time I'd studied that. And then really after that, I think my writing moved up a notch. And as I say, then at the start of in around 2000, 2001, I started getting things published and winning a few prizes for short stories and poems. And it's pretty much since then I started taking it properly seriously, you know.
Yeah, that's brilliant, David. So make sure you send me on the links to your books, so people can buy them. Are they available like on Amazon and all the major?
Yeah, well, they will be. I'd say that probably the easiest way to get the poetry is straight through Dira Press, their website. You know what I mean?
Oh, very good. Yeah.
That way you don't have to pay commissions and everything like that. For Fugitive, if you go to Book Depository, it's free postage worldwide. A lot of people, you know, a lot of people just by default go into Amazon, and you end up paying an extra €3 or €4 in postage.
Exactly.
And enough, Amazon actually own Book Depository. So I don't get the logic, but Book Depository is free postage. I mean, I could send a book to Australia for free. Well, I couldn't, but you know what I mean? There's no postage involved, which makes that a great thing.
Yeah, that's great advice for all the listeners. So thanks a lot for that, and for myself as well. That's brilliant.
Sure, yeah. Save your postal bill.
That's it. And so that's great. And I was going to ask you as well. You know, the book Fugitive. Would you might give us a bit of background about that book, what it's about, just a little bit of a teaser for people to listen to get it, forgetting the book. Yeah.
As I say, it's my second short story collection, and the last short story collection came out in 2013. So it's really, you know, the way everyone talks about this, the problem with the second album. You know, you release your first album, which is all the songs you've been writing for the past 20 years. Your second album, then you have to squeeze 1 year's worth onto an album, and the thing called the curse of the second album. Well, in this case, for various reasons, 8 years passed before this one came out. You know what I mean? Since 2013. So it's more like a second greatest hits. So, you know, I've 50 or 60 short stories that I was able to choose from to select down into this collection. And a lot of them have won prizes, awards, been shortlisted. So I had a long time to actually select the best of. The title story, Fugitive, is the longest of them. It was published over in the States as Tiernan and Oak a few years ago, but I changed the title. I think Fugitive makes more sense. And it's basically about a Lebanese student. She's over here in one of the institutes that teach film. And like most people who are not in the EU, your visa, you can only get a visa if you're full-time studying or whatever. And there's a sleazy lecturer who's aware of this, you know what I mean? And he's her supervisor and he's trying to, you know, put pressure on her one way or another. And she ends up just clocking him with a motorbike helmet, you know, whack. And then herself and the guy who's narrating the story, they head off on a motorbike and they become like, you know, fugitive, you know. And I'm not going to give much away, but that's by far the longest story in the book. And in many ways, it's, I think, one of the best stories I've written. It's about 15,000 words, which is almost a novella. Whereas the shortest one in the book would be only 1,000 words, you know? It covers, like the stories in it that were written maybe 10, 15 years ago. And then the most recent one is set during lockdown. The problem of a woman who's there and she's in lockdown with an abusive husband. This is the early lockdown when you kind of had to stay in and, you know, have that out. So, I mean, one of the nice things about short stories, I'm sure you know yourself, if you're writing a novel, you're probably writing over 2 or 3 years, one continuous story. With short stories, you have the flexibility of kind of looking at what grabs your interest in the news or in current affairs and answering it really, really, you know, in the moment. So there's stories in this, you know, as I say, it's come back over 8 or 9 years that deal with the economic crash, with ghost estates, with flooding. You know what I mean? You know, you can respond. You know, a novel, you've only got one big theme, and you know it's going to take you 3 or 4 years to do. But with you got the flexibility to cover a lot of things and play with a lot of voices. Some of them are slightly more humorous, some of them are dark. You know, so I really think there's a great thing happening in Ireland at the moment with the short story. There's a lot of festivals featuring them. There's a lot of them going out on RTE radio or whatever. People listen to them. You know, your attention span, I think, in the modern world might be limited to 10 or 15 minutes. You get a good story here, then, or read, then, you know, then you can just put the book away, pick it up in a month's time. You haven't lost anything, read another story, you know. But the main thing that's happening, I'm sure, again, you'll know this, or your readers probably will. There's an awful lot of small independent publishers like Ireland House, like Dira Press, you know, that are willing to put the effort in to publish short stories, to publish poetry, you know, and get it out there. Whereas 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there were 1 or 2 big publishers and they weren't interested. So there's a lot that's going on that's really interesting from a writing point of view at the moment. And then every town, as you probably know, has its own literary festival at some point.
That's right.
But again, it gets the interest there, you know. It means, you know, you start entering a few competitions, maybe you get lucky at your shortlisted, or you get one that comes second or whatever, and suddenly you're touring, you're reading them out. It's a real it's a lively scene, a bit like I imagine music must be when you're writing songs. You get a chance to play a gig in a pub, you know, and get some of your songs out there. You know, it's all about exposure, Mark, isn't it? You know,
it is definitely. Yeah, hopefully we're getting back into that scene again. So thanks a lot for letting the listeners hear that about that song, that book, Fugitive. Sounds really good. Yeah. So that's great. And can I just ask you as well? You know, during your writing, have you ever had a problem where you've hit a metaphorical wall, or you know, how do you deal with that if that ever happens to you?
Oh God, it happens a lot. I mean, I don't know any writers who it doesn't happen to. What I tend to do is I write in a lot of different genre. So I have short stories, of poetry, of novels, and of drama, usually all on my hard drive somewhere. So we'll say I'm writing a novel, and a novel, as I say, can occupy for a couple of years. And I say I'm hitting a brick wall in that. It may be that something in the novel might work in a different way. So for example, there's a work in progress I wrote. It still hasn't found a publisher. It's called Under the Sign of the Goat. And when I got stuck in that a few years ago, it's set in a college. As I said, I used to teach in Carlow College. It's set in a college not unlike Carlow, and it's all about a student. Her body is taken out of the river. She's drowned herself, like, you know, and then they find out she's pregnant, or she was pregnant. And there's a lecturer who's kind of involved, and is it his kid, you know, all this sort of stuff. That's what the novel is about. So I took one section of that and I said, would that work as a play, as a one-act drama, you know?
Very good, yeah.
And I wrote it, I converted it into one-act drama, and we put it on the amateur drama circuit. We put it into Bray one-act festival, and it came first. It swept the boards. It then got published over in America as a one-act play in the Kenyon Review, like, you know. So it took off its own life, you know what I mean?
Great, yeah.
And that'll happen sometimes. And that got me into writing plays for sound. So I wrote another one then that I sent into RTE, and that got onto Drama on One, you know what I mean?
Brilliant.
Whereas the novel, it's still kind of stuck. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but it's not bothering me as much. Or again, an episode might trigger a short story, or very occasionally a poem. So it's one way of sidestepping the famous roadblock, the famous writer's block, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, because for anybody that's listening, you know, who's a writer, like, don't be afraid to check different avenues out, like you said about getting them for a short play, and like that's priceless advice. So thanks a million for that.
Sure, yeah. And then no, it hasn't happened to me, but the opposite can happen, in that some people, when they write a short story, even if it does well, they think, I'm not finished with that story yet. So I remember, for example, I'm sure some of your readers or listeners will know of Liz Nugent, you know, the crime writer.
Yeah.
Her first book, Unraveling Oliver, she said, began as a short story that won a prize. And the following year, she was thinking, I'm not finished with Oliver yet. He's this sort of like cold-blooded sort of, you know, walking bastard, as my mother would have said. And she just wasn't finished with him yet. So she then began to explore more, and that developed into a novel. So it can happen that way as well, you know, with other directors, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So that's brilliant. Your books sound great. So you have to send them to me so I can put them on the show notes. So that's really, really good. Like, you know, and yeah. And I suppose you kind of answer this, but in a lot of ways there, do you have a kind of a strategy to your writing? Do you fit it into like a routine yourself, David?
Yeah, the short answer on that one is no, because it just doesn't work for me doing that. I'm an insomniac.
Okay.
And the advantage of that, if there is one, is that between the small hours in the morning when I'm lying there awake in bed, I tend to play around with ideas. And writing for me always begins with voices, like playing with voices. What does somebody sound like? What might they say?
Wow. Yeah.
Before there ever does plot. And I tend to have a very good memory. So it'll start like that, and then maybe I'll develop that when I'm walking the dog. Or there's a great walk. I live in Bray. It's a great walk between here and Greystones. It takes about an hour, 20 minutes along the coast. And I'll play around in my head. And then eventually I'll fucking have it. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'll have the discipline to sit down and actually try to commit that to paper. You know what I mean? But there's no set time for me to do that. You know what I mean? The only thing I would say is that I'm lucky in that I've got an awful lot of time available, because when you're in the zone, you really have to go with it. You know what I mean? See, this is why I couldn't combine lecturing with writing, because you might have a great idea that's hot at that moment, and suddenly you've got 100 essays that you have to correct by Monday, like 100 essays. You know what I mean? It's a weekend wiped out, and the next week as well, because you're so brain dead, I haven't done it. Or there's exams, or there's meetings, or there's whatever there is, like, you know. So I found that even by the summer break, all I wanted to do was go on holidays. But now I've got a lot more free time, I suppose. It's a bit less so during COVID, but it was really noticeable, like when I quit, that all my mates were gone 9 to 5. They were all working. There was nobody around that you could talk to. So you had to, like, you know, you had to develop your imaginative life, you know. But then,
I know.
Free time as well, you know.
And how did you find that through COVID with your writing? Did it affect you much with your inspiration? Like,
no, funny enough, myself and Dwight Tanya were both writers, and we've organised festivals and things, so we're in touch with an awful lot of writers. An awful lot of people, and myself included, haven't been as productive as you'd imagine we would have been during COVID. There was something about it. There was something about the lack of contact, or the lack of going out, or the lack of interaction, of being actually stuck, that wasn't good for the productive juices, or whatever it is. I don't know what it was like. No. Now, having said that, I had a few manuscripts to prepare. Like, I had to proofread the poetry, I had to proofread the stories. I had, like, there's a novel as well. It's a different story that came out earlier in the year. So I had a lot of stuff like that to do. And then all my teaching went online, but it kind of began to increase. There was a lot more teaching online than I would normally be doing, because it was so easy from people from all around the country, or from America, or from Germany, to join the classes, or wherever it is. Suddenly there was loads of work that way, and I always have to correct their work. So I've been kept busy.
Full on,
but purely from a creative point of view, I can't wait for things to open up again. Like,
no.
One of the nice things is, as I say, like the poetry Liffey sequence came out last month, so we had an online launch for that. We launched it over Zoom, etc., YouTube. And the problem with that, of course, is there was 160 people watching, but not that many people buying. Whereas if you're in a room with you, they're not going to sneak out. But myself and my wife Tanya, we both have a book out with Ireland House at the same time. Unique selling point, Mark. When's the last time a husband and wife team had 2 books out on the same day? Do you know what I mean?
There you go, yeah.
So what we're doing is, things have just opened up since October 22nd. We're having a launch for it in Belfast on Thursday, in Bray on the following Monday, in Dublin on the following Tuesday after that, then over in Galway, then down in Kerry. So we're going to have live tours.
Great.
And I'm really can't wait for that. Like, just having people in the room, just looking for it, it's just not the same over Zoom. Do you know what I mean? And
no, definitely not.
That we definitely miss. Like my wife Tanya, she organized for 3 or 4 years a monthly literary salon in Toners in Baggot Street, where we'd invite a few poets and a few short story writers to come in and to live read in the bar, and then have an open mic for anyone who came along. And we did that, and it was great. Like, it's just great to have that live scene.
Brilliant.
Really appreciate it.
Oh, definitely, big time. That's great. It's a great thing to do. And again, if I can help you any way to advertise what you're doing there as well, send me the links as well, so people will be able to find them. Yeah, great stuff. And very quickly as well, do you what authors are inspired you in your writing? Could you say, David? Is there anybody that stand out that inspired you?
There's so many.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always had a huge, like, in fiction, I've a huge admiration for Dostoevsky, for example, going all the way back to when I was about 14 or 15. But there's some terrific writers, like, there really are, that I'm drawn back to again and again. Like on the Irish scene, for example, when Mike McCormack brought out Solar Bones, I was blown away by that. This year, there's a debut collection of short stories by Louise Kennedy, The End of the World as a Cul-de-sac. Brilliant writing, like, that the Irish writing of the last 20 years has taken a leap forward, because there are so many smaller publishers backing them, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Then the short story, I suppose, I know people like Laurie Moore. She's got a great sense of humor over in the States. She's brilliant,
I've heard of her.
Poetry, God, poetry I just absorb from everywhere. There's a wonderful writer over on Loch Derg. She's called Eleanor Hooker. She's one of my favorite Irish writers, like, so she's just had a book out as well with I think it's with Daedalus now, if I remember right, but a terrific writer. Anne Reaney Curran has just had a book out, The Poison Glen, with Gallery. All terrific poets, like, so there really is a wonderful scene in Ireland at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great list. That's a great list, David. Great stuff. Yeah. So that's great. I really appreciate you coming on today, David, to the podcast.
I appreciate the exposure. It's great.
Yeah. So one more thing before you go, if that's okay. If you could give anybody, because it's a motivational podcast as well, if you could give anybody advice to keep themselves motivated through their writing, I suppose through these hard times as well, what would you say to them?
I'll tell you what I say. It is this: we all have a little critic that sits on our shoulder saying, "That's not good enough. That's not good enough. Go back, change that. I'll look at that. That's rubbish. Or whatever." And what I always say, I teach a lot of writing, as I say. Imagine you're a potter and you want to make a pot on a wheel. You have to get the clay onto the wheel before you can shape it. So
Great.
get your first draft down, and only then you can, then worry about fiddling and foostering and is it good enough and should this be here, but get
Yeah.
it down first, get it down. And then, as a lot of people have said, all good writing is rewriting. That's when you start doing the posh stuff, the good stuff, But yeah, get it down.
That's great advice. Thanks very much for that. That's brilliant advice. Thanks a million. So yeah, that's brilliant. I wish you all your success in your future writing, David. Brilliant. And one last thing, if that's okay, do you listen to any music when you're writing? Because a lot of people have been having on the podcast really recently. Writers start to listen to a lot of music when they're writing. Do you do that? Have you done that?
Pretty much Lyric FM is on all day.
When you, like in the earphones, wherever, yeah.
But the thing is, I find that I'm an absolute fan of people like Tom Waits, Leonard Cohen, whoever, But if anything has lyrics, I'm going to listen to the lyrics. You know what I mean? So it has to be instrumental. So Lyric FM, the full score and like that.
Great idea, yeah.
Muskevich, Kranich, they got brilliant people on that choosing for you. So that tends to be on all day when I'm writing.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. Thanks a lot for that, David. That's brilliant. So thanks a million, David Butler, again for coming on the podcast. And you're going to share all your links to your books, and I can put them on the podcast. Okay.
Will do, Mark. Okay, terrific.
Cheers. So thanks everyone for listening to today's podcast, Authors Tuesday, with David Butler, and I'm your host, Mark Lestrange. So stay tuned. We're going to have another podcast on Thursday. So take care of yourselves. Thanks again. Take care.